Right off the bat, I need to admit to be more than biased towards Control. It combines some of my favorite things like action gaming, new weird literature, cross mythologies, and being made by a Finnish company. As a Finn, that last part is especially important to me, and I do think that the Finnish heritage does play a larger role in the game's story than most might realize, especially when it comes to the portrayal of an average worker compared to a monolithic extension of the American government. The game repeatedly emphasizes the power that the people doing the actual practical work hold, positioning the workers and the management as two godlike entities fighting for control. But before I get started on that, let's take a quick look at the basic premise of the game. If you are already familiar with this, feel free to skip to this part in the video. Full spoilers for the game will follow. Developed by the Finnish company Remedy and published in 2019, Control is a game inspired by the new weird genre as well as the crowdsourced SCP fiction. The story centers around the mysterious Bureau of Control, tasked to investigate paranatural events on American soil as well as their causes. The Bureau operates from within the oldest house, itself a mystical, almost a living entity that shields the Bureau from outsiders. The protagonist of the game, Jesse Faden, manages to find the Bureau by being guided by an entity called Polaris, who has followed her after a paranatural incident that happened in her childhood. Following that same incident, Jesse's brother Dylan was kidnapped by the Bureau, and it is finding him that drives Jesse to the oldest house. However, Jesse's arrival coincides with one of the direst crises in the Bureau's history. A hostile paranatural entity called the Hiss has infiltrated the house and the place is in lockdown. The Hiss infects the unprotected personnel, paralyzing most and transforming some into monstrosities. Surprisingly, Jesse finds the director of the Bureau dead, having committed suicide, and as she picks up his service weapon, Jesse is suddenly appointed as the new director by the invisible and sinister board. This leaves Jessie with the responsibility of not only finding her brother, but also developing her new paranatural powers, purging the Hiss from the oldest house, and saving the Bureau and the rest of the world from destruction. I should first point out that Jessie is completely unqualified to be the director, at least formally. From what we know, her experience consists mostly of odd jobs like janitorial duties, which she did while being on the run from the Bureau and looking for Dylan. Her being worthy is justified by overcoming some simple gameplay challenges, essentially a tutorial, but mostly just by the whims of the board. The board are an incredibly cryptic and distant entity. We never see them on screen, and they are mainly represented by the black pyramid that's also visible on the Bureau's sigil. The board also tends to use speech with multiple overlapping meanings, such as "you can contact us/past selves" and "we expect compulsive/weekly calls." It is clear that the board as an entity is not of this world. Most likely they are connected to whatever powers the other paranatural phenomena, like the superpower granting objects of power. This can be read as a metaphorical comparison to how boards of directors are perceived by the workers in real life. They are rarely seen and the mechanisms of their function are cryptic at best. Yet they wield incredible power over the company, not born from actually making the products or providing the services, but from influence or words, like magic. A company or a bureau can change drastically based on the will of the board alone. So in this sense, it is not all that surprising that Jessie was so easily installed by the board, nor that the other bureau employees accept her so quickly. You see, the paranatural aspects of Control are largely based in belief and iconography. In its world, it is humanity's shared subconscious and its icons that give things their paranatural power. The workers of the bureau have learned to accept this a long time ago. So if the board, an entity defined by their control over the bureau, names Jessie as the new director, that decision is as irrefutable as the laws of nature. But just because Jessie is the director doesn't mean that she is able to waltz through the oldest house like she owns the place. Outside of the hostile Hiss, the architecture of the building seems to resist her as well. Art-wise, the oldest house takes inspiration from brutalist architecture, which emphasizes practicality and simplicity over beauty and comfort. You can look at the former Soviet Union for examples, or even Finnish cities like Kouvola. Heck, even my own home city has plenty of similar architecture. So even here, Remedy's Finnish heritage is already quite apparent. Not only is the oldest house visually hostile, it is also that in terms of the gameplay. The interiors can be maze-like and at times hard to navigate, and the maps seem to almost purposefully obfuscate things like different floor levels. However, as the player makes their way through the game, the oldest house begins to feel more comfortable and easier to navigate. This happens by pure experience and repetition, but also through game mechanics. For example, abilities like flight make the traveling much easier, and you're able to dispose the randomly spawning his soldiers much quicker. I mean, even the slightly uncanny facial animations turn from being outright creepy to kinda endearing. Another thing to note is the checkpoint system, called the control points. At the beginning of the game, these points are corrupted by his influence, but Jesse is able to purge them and thus claim them. This not only enables saving and fast travel on that specific location, but also often changes the environment that's been twisted by the hiss. The broken, nonsensical architecture transforms into something much more functional, simpler, and easier to understand. So, as Jesse traverses through the game and becomes more powerful as the director, so does the oldest house, representative of the Bureau as a workplace, become a more welcoming place. I would even say that Jesse manages to ultimately subjugate and gain control over it. This obviously mirrors the path many of us would take at a new job, where the exciting and even scary work environment eventually turns into something that we can thrive in and use to push for success. And it is Jesse's willingness and ability to get hands-on, to do the dirty groundwork herself, that ultimately seems to differentiate her as the better director compared to her predecessors. The previous director, Zacharias Trench, was riddled with paranoia that eventually isolated him from the rest of the workplace and its community, much thanks to the Hiss's corruption. The director before him, Northmore, was so power-hungry that he lost control of his paranatural powers, ending up as the power source of the oldest house.
Okay, so what happens again if that thing blows up?
Power. Explosion. Too much. Director's duty. Keep the lights on.
Suffice to say, directors like Jesse are exceedingly rare, and in her, Remedy seems to present an ideal image of a company leader, one who isn't above doing the dirty work themselves, and who is most of all working for the other employees. In fact, Jesse ends up turning against the almighty power-granting board by the end of the final DLC, one last signifier of where her strengths and loyalties lie. Not to get too political here, but I can't help but wonder if Remedy's status as a Finnish company affected how they have portrayed the relationship between the average worker and the upper management. I feel like, on average, the worker is in a much stronger position in Finland than in America, and there is a greater sense of equality in the workplace, in part thanks to strong unions and workers' rights. For example, the janitor Ahti spending his coffee break with the security chief Simon Arish reads to me as a moment straight out of the Finnish workplace, but I might be completely wrong here.
Do you know this Ahti guy?
Of course, he's my favorite coffee break buddy. Dude has got some crazy stories. He probably knows more than anyone else around here, if you can make sense of what he's saying.
It is clear, however, that Remedy has always taken inspiration from American pop culture as an outsider looking in. The original Max Payne series was inspired by gritty detective dramas and action movies, Alan Wake by Stephen King horror stories, and Quantum Break by sci-fi television like Quantum Leap, which has been an American forte for a long time. With Control, you can point to the aforementioned SCP fiction, but also series like The X-Files. Of course, the government is a powerful entity in any country, but the American government especially has been portrayed in pop culture as an all-powerful, all-encompassing, information-suppressing being. I can for sure say that the Finnish government is not portrayed with the same kind of reverence. So again, I can't help but to read the Bureau as a collision between the pop culture image of the American workplace, especially within government, and the developer team's own ideas of what workplace culture should be like. And speaking of Finnish influences, one very prominent side character and a fan favorite is Ahti, the janitor of the oldest house. Despite his humble position, Ahti is possibly one of the most powerful beings that Jesse encounters throughout the game. However, not much is known about him and, well, my goal is to give some clarity to the situation. Perhaps the most prominent aspect of Ahti is that he is Finnish. And I don't mean just that he is Finnish coded, has Finnish influences or anything like that. He is Finnish. This might sound like a glaringly obvious observation. After all, not only does Ahti have a Finnish name, but he also speaks with a heavy Finnish accent, uses poorly translated Finnish idioms, and occasionally slips into pure Finnish.
Throw it into fire. Burn it all. Burn it into a reindeer, not into a moose.
Interestingly, Ahti is played by the Finnish actor Martti Suosalo, whose natural English accent is actually a lot lighter than Ahti's. I have linked his BAFTA acceptance speech in the description for reference. So this harder to understand way of speech is a clear and risky artistic choice. Personally, I'm not sure how much of Ahti's speech I would have understood if I wasn't a Finnish speaker myself. Now, traditionally, Remedy hasn't really emphasized their Finnish heritage. Its influence has mostly consisted of cheeky Easter eggs or the aforementioned way of looking at American media as an outsider. So, to do a completely 180 with Ahti, to the point that many players might find it distracting, is quite surprising. But I believe there is a good reason why Ahti's Finnishness is so inherent to him as a character. Most immediately, it plays into the strangeness of the world, where everything is just a bit off. Ahti's linguistic quirks make him harder to decipher in a way that almost gives him a sinister aura, where you're not quite sure what his deal is. This is of course supported by the fantastic visual design. But let's get to the meat of it already. One of the biggest clues about Ahti's true nature is his name. Ahti, you see, is the name of the Finnish god of water, most prominently associated with lakes and the sea. We can also hear the previous director Trench talk about dreaming of an old god who sounds a lot like Ahti.
I remember it was like this dream I had last night. See, there was this man, here, in this very room. And then, well, sometimes he was a plumber, unclogging the drain, and because there was a fish stuck there. Yeah, a big fish. But sometimes he was an old god, you see, and he had put the fish there in the first place to keep the waste. There was rising waste from leaking out, so he was he was conflicted, but he knew many things. But he was also sort of senile, like me.
Now, if you were to take such a god and try to find the right role for him within a government bureau, a janitor would be the perfect fit, After all, water is often associated with cleanliness, which is the janitor's main duty. Additionally, the sea offers a way to traverse between nations and realms, which is another important aspect of Ahti. He can appear anywhere in the oldest house and has his own closet within the Ocean View Motel, a kind of prototypical liminal space which Jesse uses to travel between dimensions. At the same time, I find Ahti's role as a janitor to carry a double meaning. Janitors are often placed at the bottom of the workplace's hierarchy, which emphasizes the humble nature of Ahti as a character. At the same time, however, they are the ones with access to pretty much everywhere, and whose disappearance would be noticed almost immediately. They hold more influence than is readily apparent. I love how Ahti's all-encompassing presence in the oldest house is represented by his cleaning cart, which seems to pop up wherever you go and is often playing a Finnish tango. It's such a friendly and reassuring thing in the midst of the otherwise hostile house.
Broken? How many dead ends can this place have? We need to find Ahti.
Interestingly, the Finnish word for janitor is talonmies, which literally translates to the man of the house. This describes Ahti even better than the English version of the word. Out of all the characters in Control, Ahti seems to be the most in sync with the oldest house, both taking care of its well-being and being able to manipulate it at will. One important segment that solidifies this theory is Ahti's holiday. Jesse chases Ahti to the bottom of the oldest house, where she gets glimpses of this another plane where Ahti has traveled to for his vacation. I will note that this is just about the most perfect holiday a Finn could ask for, with forest, sea and sauna. Even the tall pillars at the bottom of the oldest house give the impression of a thick pine tree forest. Importantly, and I'm not sure how many people could decipher this, we hear Ahti talking with his guests thusly.
Viikingit saatana, ei kestänyt ruottalaisen veljekset kunnon löyly. Samma på svenska!
This roughly translates to "damn Vikings, the Swedish brothers couldn't handle some proper heat", and what we hear in the background is obviously water being thrown on the sauna stove. Right after this, Ahti gives Jesse a gift from his friends, a cassette player containing a song by the band All Gods of Asgard. This band actually made an appearance in Alan Wake, but in the context of Control, it has a new meaning. The cassette belongs to real gods of Asgard, Nordic gods, who Ahti just sat in the sauna with. The area also includes a mysterious stone tablet decorated with an inscription of a tree. Others have already compared this to the world tree, Yggdrasil, found in the Nordic mythology, but the same idea of a tree holding up the world can also be found in Finnish mythology. Interestingly, a spruce, like portrayed in the stone tablet, is thought to have been connected to the Finnish underworld, an upside-down realm of opposites and mysticism, the non-human world. So to find this image at the place where Jesse is able to glimpse into the realm of the gods is quite fitting. So I do believe that Ahti is in fact literally a Finnish god working undercover, so to speak. But what is a god exactly in the context of Control? That is almost impossible to answer. Perhaps they are beings which come to be when paranatural powers interact with the collective subconscious, much like objects of power. Or maybe they are beings that already exist within the paranatural astral plane, much like the board. Personally, I lean towards the latter explanation. mostly because Ahti is portrayed as very much equal or superior to the board. When Jessie arrives to the oldest house, Ahti believes her to be his new assistant. Even after Jessie becomes the director, Ahti simply calls her the janitor's assistant. This means that Ahti, the janitor, is in fact above the director in the hierarchy of the oldest house, just like the board. But interestingly, Ahti does not seem to consider the board as his equal. Notably, he says that he will take them behind the sauna if they do not hire Jessie, which is a Finnish idiom for beating someone up.
If they don't hire you, you are no helvet. There be work for the axe. Take them behind the sauna, jumalauta.
It might be that Ahti, having accepted a physical form and actually getting involved in the practical work of the oldest house, has more direct power compared to the board, who still exist in another plane and must work through mediums, like the director or the service weapon. It might even be that Ahti has his own agenda, one separate from or even going directly against that of the board, as he specifically chose the much more independently minded Jessie as his assistant.
You think there's a dog buried in this? I can tell you are not yesterday's Krause's son. That's why you'll make a great assistant.
Of course, this still kinda leaves us wondering what is the difference between the kinds of gods that Ahti met on his holiday and entities like the board. I would speculate that all gods are simply beings like the board who have chosen to step into the material world, perhaps by taking advantage of existing concepts of godlike beings, which they are able to wear like a second skin. But all this ultimately exists to enforce the earlier point, how the workers at the lower steps of the hierarchy, those who are willing to get their hands dirty, are ultimately more deserving of power, or perhaps just more important in and of themselves, compared to the distant management. In this, I would argue that for the thematic impact of control, Ahti is actually one of its most important characters, only eclipsed by Jessie herself, and even that is arguable. Thank you so much for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it. Do you agree or disagree with my interpretation? Leave a comment, I would love to talk with you. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can show your support by liking, subscribing and sharing the video. That way I will know that I should keep making more. Thanks again for watching and happy holidays!